Here you saw the Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies, Mondli Gungubele, and the Minister of Social Development, Lindiwe, Zulu, explaining some of the problems they've had in making sure that social grants were paid. That money supposed to flow from the South African Social Security Agency, SASSA, to the Postbank. It seems the problem lay on the Postbank side. Then overnight, the board of the Postbank resigning, saying the Minister, Mondli Gungubele in this case, had been interfering in how they were trying to run the institution. All of this may remind you of what happened back in 2015, 2016, 2017, where the then Minister of Social Development, Badabile Dlamini, insisted on using the company Cash Paymaster Services to pay grants. In the end, a court found she'd actually lied in her efforts to try and keep using Cash Paymaster Services. Professor Jannie Rossouw is at the Graduate School of Business Administration at Wits University. Professor, good afternoon to you. Firstly, the issue of social grants generally. They keep so many people alive, so many families, so many children alive. What would happen if they just weren't paid 1 month? What kind of nightmare would it be?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Yes, indeed, it will be a social nightmare, if I can use that word, because people will be unable to buy food, to get shelter, to keep their families alive. Because many people, not only the recipients, but also some of the dependents, dependent on these grants. So, as you've played the intro, Stephen, I couldn't help but wonder whether any cabinet minister's salary has ever been paid late in South Africa. Perhaps that's the solution. We stop paying the salaries of cabinet ministers until such time as all social grant payments are paid on time, so that cabinet ministers can feel it in their own pockets.
What I've never really understood is that so many countries around the world have a social grant system. There must be so many consistent, efficient ways to pay social grants. I realize we have rural areas. I realize that we have particular problems. But why do we keep having what seem to be very similar problems all the time?
Yeah, Stephen, this makes me suspicious whether there's somebody somewhere in the value chain that gets some form of benefit from non-payment or late payment of these grants, but for that we will need a proper audit and a proper investigation. However, it remains shocking that after all these years of problems, we still have these glitches, we still have these problems, that this cannot be sorted out, that this cannot happen seamlessly. And this is unfortunately the case with many things that the government touch, from SAA that is not flying, to the NEL making a loss. So the government has lost its ability to do efficient administration. And I must say, at the same time, there's this idea that the government must start a state bank. If it can't even run a post bank properly, I shudder to think what will happen if the government tries to run a state bank. It's clear that the government is just not up to running these institutions effectively, and unfortunately, ordinary South Africans are at the receiving end.
It's also, I mean, it can't be that we don't have the know-how. Some of our banks are world-class. Our banks will offer you services on your phone that you actually don't get in many other countries. We have supermarkets with big branches around the country with all of the infrastructure that brings. So if we want to do this properly, there's no doubt that we can.
Yes, we can do this properly, and if Postbank can't do this, then we need to find another delivery channel to make sure that it happens. Perhaps SASSA payments must go through the banking industry or whatever the solution is, but we cannot have a situation where these grants are not paid and people do not know how this will play out or how long they will wait for payment of their grants. So it is incompetence of the South African government, and it seems to me that there are very little consequences. I'm sure in any other country, if grants are not paid on time, at the minimum, the responsible ministers will tender their resignations from cabinet because they are clearly not up to the job.
There's a debate at the moment about a basic income grant, and we already have the social relief of distress grant, and as we understand it, the National Treasury is discussing this issue. There's some difficulties around it. But would that be more difficult to pay than the current system of grants, or would it actually maybe easier because everybody would get a grant, so you wouldn't have to be quite so careful about it?
Well, if you don't have a basic system that works and you add more beneficiaries to the system, your glitches will become bigger and your payment problems will become bigger. So you cannot move in that direction until you have a system that can guarantee delivery. And clearly we do not have that in place in South Africa at the moment. So it really scares me to think, for instance, this government wants to introduce a national health insurance system, but it can't even run a social payment system. So how on earth can this government even dream of implementing, for instance, a national health insurance system purportedly to cover 60 million people if they can't cover less than half of that through a grant payment system? So it just boggles the mind that the government keeps on dreaming on new ideas but can't do what it is already obliged to do at this moment.
Professor Jannie Rossouw, thank you. From the Graduate School of Business Administration at Wits University, really appreciate the time.